What shows are on BQN, you ask? Well, here's a rundown of some podcasts you might be interested in. All Good Things, a Star Trek Universe podcast covering all of Trek, hosted by Amy, Mark, Christos, Kelvin, and Kristen. Whether you've got Xbox or Nintendo, check out Bargain Bin Gamer, a YouTube show hosted by Davey, a self-proclaimed gamer who specializes in reviewing and showcasing affordable video games. 2 episodes enter the arena, 1 comes out victorious. Join hosts Joe and Kevin and a guest as they debate which should win the Batleth battle. Grab your popcorn as you listen to Cinema Z, a film discussion and review podcast showcasing films you probably missed but should definitely check out. Hosted by Mark and Matt. Don your apron for The Food Replicator, where Matthew eats and drinks his way through the Star Trek cocktail and 3 cookbooks. Beam Aboard Galaxy Class, a Star Trek Next Generation podcast covering all of TNG, hosted by Steven. In order to not repeat it, listen to History with the Zalagis, a snippet of historical events from around the world, hosted by Chrissy and Jason. For the newest Trek coverage, check out Infinite Diversity, hosted by Chrissy and Thad. Curl up with a good book and delve into Beta Canon with Peter, host of the online Trek Book Club on Twitter, and his new companion, Trek Book Club podcast. Test your Trek knowledge with Treksperts Quiz, a Star Trek quiz show hosted and written by Davey. Whether you're a member of Starfleet Federation or Planetary Union, go check out Union Federation, covering current Star Trek and the Orville, which we all know is really a Trek show, hosted by Kyle, Kevin, Amy, and Haley. Head over to YouTube and watch The View Screen live on Sundays, your Trek-inspired talk show hosted by Kelvin and Amy, with Season 2 starting in September for a 10-week run. Spill the tea with Christos while he discusses current Trek news and events and explores the world of fandom via guest interviews, all with a LGBTQIA+ perspective on What's the Tea-Bab. And for our Patreon members, we have the Hive Mind with monthly script readings, Let's Fly, a Discovery reaction show, It's Green, a cornucopia of topics, Amy's Math Moments, a quick look at math moments in Star Trek. We know you have a choice of podcasts to choose from, and we thank you for listening to BQN. Assimilate the audio. You're listening to BQN. Assimilate the audio.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the BQN Hive Mind. This is the BQN Podcast Network's chat show where we invite our network patrons to come and be a part of the show. If you would like to be a part of future Hive Mind experiences, you can sign up to be a patron over at patreon.com/BQN. It's me, I'm your host, Davey, and we are doing a special Hive Mind today. It is Warp Me Part 2, where we are unpacking episodes 6 to 10 of the Lower Decks final season. Joining me today are BQN Network patrons Jim. Hello, Jim. How are you?
I'm doing great today, and technically, Davey, wouldn't it be engaged to the core now and not warp me?
True. I don't know if engage the core is really caught on yet, much to Ransom's dismay. But hey, if it ever comes back, it could be engage the core.
Yeah.
And also joining us today is BQN Network patron Jonathan Snow. Hey, Jonathan, how are you?
Hey, everybody. Doing great.
Good to see you all back. We do have a few others who are going to join us a little later on in the broadcast. Jerry Antomato's promised he's going to be here as well. But here we are. Another Star Trek series has been and gone. Lower Decks has given us 5 seasons, 50 episodes of hilarious animated entertainment. Surprisingly turned into one of the most beloved of the modern Trek shows. Jim, how are you feeling now that it's over?
Oh,
A bit like that? A bit like that?
yeah. I'm sad to see it go. I think I told you this before in the previous Warp Me when the announcement came out about this. I was legitimately upset when they announced this show was being canceled because this show should have been the first show to break this to break the 7 and under curse.
It's funny that you say that because some of the reviews early on in the season, for not only on this show but across other podcasts as well, there were a few people saying, "Oh, it's feeling very samey," but then it started to pick up towards the end, and then there was very much, I think, a feeling across the fandom when the finale aired a few days ago of, "Oh no, I'm not ready yet. No, I'm not ready yet. I don't want them to go. I don't want them to go."
No.
Jonathan, how are you? Jonathan, how are you feeling now that it's over?
I'm a little sad that it's over. I'm more grateful that we got to experience the show at all.
Mm-hmm.
Considering the current digital age that we live in of the streaming wars and everything. I do think it has suffered from the classic Star Trek curse that no Star Trek show is fully appreciated for what it is while it airs, and only when it comes to an end, or is it coming to an end, do fans really start to give it a second chance or give it another look and then fall in love with it. And I think what made this show a success in my mind and in the minds of many fans is that it was really written for the fans. When they announced that they were going to be doing a Star Trek comedy animated show, I initially was dreading the idea. I said, why are they going to ruin the franchise? And it turned out to be my favorite series because when they make fun and they tell jokes, it's not at the show mocking it. It's with the fans, going along for the fans. Many of the lines that make the show so funny are things that you can picture yourself or other fans saying while watching an episode of Star Trek.
And they also created a program that people who aren't that diehard about the franchise have enjoyed as well. I've sat down with friends who just, they're Rick and Morty fans. They like this style of comedy and animation. And, whilst there are a lot of deep cuts that fly right over their heads, they are still laughing and enjoying it and really appreciate the characters and the way, the world that they've built inside the Star Trek universe. But it's very much the Lower Decks world and it's the Lower Decks universe, but still very Star Trek feeling at the same time. It's cool. It's cool.
Yeah, and I remember when they came out and they said it was the guy from who created Rick and Morty who created it. I was like, yeah, that's gonna be awesome. Getting back to my point, it was like that show's been on for 20 plus years. The guy who makes it knows what he's doing, and he's a Star Trek fan. This show will go on for decades. It's amazing. Clearly not, or at least the decades part.
I probably was one of the most surprised people when this got announced as being end, because I think only 3 months previously I had commented on one of these podcasts saying, well, this is the cheapest Star Trek show there is to make. It will always be the cheapest Star Trek show there is to make. So I imagine, we will get many years out of this, especially since they're keeping it to 10 episodes. And then, sure enough, oh no, it's done. It's over. It's already concluded. And so that was very shocking and surprising. But I guess I should just steal the TNG phrase, all good things must come to an end.
100%. What really stands out for me, and I've said this a few times about Lower Decks ending, is at least we get 5 high quality seasons and very rewatchable seasons as well, I might add. The shorter form, the shorter episodes are much easier to binge, and for me, it's my new Star Trek comfort food. Whereas previously, I've often had old episodes of TNG on in the background whilst I'm pottering around the house or making dinner. Lower Decks has become the new show that I leave on, and I can watch it over and over and over again, and sometimes find jokes I haven't seen before, because there's often so much happening in a scene that there can just be little things in the background that maybe you didn't see on the first, second, or third watch. Jim, what do you think of that? What do you think of 5 high-quality seasons versus a show that maybe stretches on a little bit too long and outstays its welcome?
I kind of agree with you on that. Like, every season has been good. Like, I do kind of miss the days when I do sometimes kind of miss the days when we did have clunkers, because even the clunkers, even some of those clunker episodes could have moments of gold in them. But still, like you said, 5 great quality rewatchable seasons, and on top of that, there was character growth in every character across all 5 seasons. Because like when the show started out, Boimler was this. How do I say this? Boimler was an anxiety-filled mess who could barely do his job. Now he's
first officer candidate,
the most competent senior officer on the Cerritos.
Absolutely. And hello to our latecomer, Jerry. Jerry, welcome. We're all just, reflecting on how we feel now that Lower Decks is over. How are you feeling?
Yeah, it's really bittersweet, I think. And I think if you guys saw the Paramount Plus sort of discussions with Will Wheaton, the cast described it like that as well. I'm really hoping that it gets picked up like Prodigy, as I'm sure everybody else does. But I think it rounded off really, really well for the last season.
So let's dive through the episodes. So in Warp Me Part 1, we did episodes 1 to 5. So we're going to cover off episodes 6 to 10. So that is Of Gods and Angels, Fully Dilated, Upper Decks, Fisher Quest, and The New Next Generation. For me personally, I found the second half of the season was it kind of really hit its stride then. But let's start with the first, episode 6 of Gods and Angels. Now, this
Gods and Angles.
Angles, Gods and Angles. That's right. Sorry, you're right. Of Gods and Angles, hilarious. Which I believe is so named because of the orbs and the cubes. So if we look at the first officer's log from the beginning, they are out the front of the Veriflex Nebula, where they have been hosting peace talks between the inhabitants, the orbs and the cubes, who are both photonic species made of pure energy. The orbs and cubes have been at war since their home nebulas collided over a century ago. Brokering peace will require some complex diplomacy, and that's not the only problem that he has to deal with today. So let's go around the room and hear impressions of Gods and Angles. Jim, I'll start with you.
I thought first off, I'm trying to remember some of this episode because it's been a while. But what I do remember, I did enjoy this episode. Like, it was actually an original plot involving a very non-humanoid species that we never would have seen in live action. And on top of that, we get an ensign who's a demigod,
Oh yes, Kaishon, Lieutenant junior grade Kaishon. Yes.
No, not Kaishon.
Oh, not Kaishon.
Kaishon's.
It's not her name.
Oh, okay.
Ollie.
Yeah, there's the demigod. I can't
Ollie.
remember what
Ollie. Yes, it is.
Ollie.
It's Ollie. Ollie. Yes.
Ollie. That's it.
Sorry.
No, Kaishon's a Tamarian or something like that.
Yeah. No, you're right. Yes. I'm sorry. I've got Memory Alpha open and I'm looking at the wrong characters.
No, but On that part, I was confused whether she was like the granddaughter or great granddaughter of like the character from like the TOS episode or not. But still, it was for the most part a really good character, really good episode. Plot points I didn't like, I can get into later.
Sure, sure. And she's the granddaughter of Zeus, one of the Greek gods of Pollux 4, which was a TOS episode as well.
Yes, and I don't think Zeus was the one we met in that episode, but apparently there's more than one.
Was it presented as Zeus? Was the line that was used in the Lower Decks episode? I
Right.
loved it. I loved it. I thought it was very clever. I thought it was a essentially doing a mashup of a TNG style peace talks, but using characters and themes from the TOS era. That's how I took this entire episode. And so, like the orbs and the cubes would be like the style that you expect to see from a TOS era. Bringing in the demigod is continuing along with that plot line, and then doing what Lower Decks does best is being able to mock and highlight those two different mishmash and the hilarity of what Star Trek can and could be.
Absolutely, yeah, but it also just threw in the utter absurdity that you expect from this kind of storyline in Lower Decks. This is like one of my favorite Lower Decks episodes where there's all this craziness going on, but then there's all the interpersonal workplace kind of comedy and drama that are just happening underneath all this epicness that's kind of going on outside. Yeah. Jerry, what were your thoughts?
Like, I kind of felt sorry for interrupting, Davey, but I kind of felt sorry for Ollie not being able to find her place anywhere for most of the episode, because she was really trying her best.
Jerry, what did you think?
Yeah, I don't think I appreciated it as much because I'm not that clued up on like TOS, but obviously it had a lot of follow on from the Greek gods episode from TOS and stuff. But I didn't think it was going to be one of the strongest episodes of season 5. But on rewatch, I actually grew to really appreciate it. And obviously the whole orbs versus squares thing, cubes thing was really, really silly. But that's what really sort of embodies Star Trek. And we always say, we really want to see sort of really new life forms and stuff in Trek. And I think this really personified sort of the whole, going far out there without sort of bipedal species and stuff.
Yeah. And it's an interesting introduction of a new character so late in the series run as well. I mean, Ollie appears in this, and I believe appears very briefly in the end as well. And the episode that Ollie is, or the callback for TOS is, I think it's Who Mourns for Adonis, is the episode that it's a callback to. But it's an interesting story. So Ollie shows up, and Ollie's just clumsy. Ollie is a demigod and should have all this power, but she's really clumsy. She crashes the anti-grav chair, and then but then because she's kind of clumsy, Ransom partners her up with Mariner, which is, I think, a reference to what Jim was talking about before, which is the character development that we've seen. Who would have thought in season 1 that Mariner would be assigned as the responsible senior officer to whip a young ensign into shape, right?
Yeah, and Lord knows she didn't want it even in season 5, but she went with it at least. And can I just say, in that scene you were just talking about with Ollie and the anti-grav cart, in that cold open, when it crashes on Ransom, and that look he gives her, that is one of the hardest laughs I've ever had watching the series.
Jonathan, what did you think of Ollie?
So I think it is again something that Lower Decks does very well, is that like everyone matters, and often they just haven't necessarily found their place or found their confidence or found their voice yet.
Mm-hmm.
So it's we've come to realize it's not necessarily that Ollie is clumsy. It's that Ollie likes to think outside of the box and doesn't really know how to channel her limited powers. We do see that, by the final episode, she seems to have figured all that out. But being this demigod and people not sure how to treat her, never seem to fit in, is how she comes into the episode, seeming to go out of her way to break the rules, but every time she does something is constantly screwing it up. Mm-hmm. And that is kind of like, the whole motto of a lower deck, right? So we do get introduced to this character very, very late, but I think it's also to juxtapose, like, this is sort of where all four of our main cast members were in the very beginning, where we started, and to see them that now that they've all ranked up to lieutenant junior grade, mm-hmm. Even though it's, one little pip above, they are now viewing things from a very different and more serious and following rules approach.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then we've got the hilarity that is the investigation into one of the missing, I can't remember if it was, they're investigating Quadrillon's quarters. So I think Quadrillon was one of the cubes. And there's just the smear on the wall, which we find out is something quite different to what we originally think it is. But it is a very, very hilarious take on the investigation of, almost like in TNG when it was in like the first or second season where there's the two warring parties on board and one of them winds up missing and just there's a pile of bones out the front of the other one's quarters. It's very much that, but then the hilariousness of Ollie trying to cover up the fact that she feels that she's responsible and how she's hiding evidence and sabotaging things along the way is really, really... Because then, again, like I was saying, then this huge war is erupting as well.
1, 2, 3, 4, I declare a shape war.
It's so funny. It's so funny. And Jerry, what did you think of the ending of this? Is that after the hilarity of all the investigation and the big war, it turns out that a cube and a sphere have had a baby, that the smear on the wall was a different bioluminescence than what
do we even have the proper rating for that in this?
I did mark not made for kids on YouTube, so it's all good.
Yeah, I don't think the rating was on there initially, Jim, but yeah, I feel like I could sort of see it coming. Like they definitely set up for it, and I thought, like as soon as they said that like one of them was missing, I thought, like they'd probably run off together. Mm-hmm. You could sort of tell it was sort of going to be like a Romeo and Juliet kind of thing, but I think they set it up so well that like it was relatively, I guess, sort of believable in the end, and like everyone sort of came together. And I think to Jonathan's point earlier, it was like the whole message was sort of thinking outside the box, whether you're in Starfleet or whether you're, part of the two sort of warring races of the spheres and the cubes, right? I think like one of the lines in the episode where Mariner was saying something like the Starfleet officers or the Starfleet senior officers are sort of like putting you back in the box after you think, like trying to think outside the box. It was sort of embodied the sort of whole episode.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
There's a line where the two warring factions, they're starting to gather together and they get larger and larger, and then you get a giant sphere and a giant cube. And I think Ransom just says, "Oh my God, they're just larger versions of what they already are. They're so uncreative." And I think that like kind of goes back to like again, people like thinking outside of the box kind of concept again. It is played several times throughout this episode in some subtle ways, other ways really much in your face.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I mean, final thoughts for me on this episode is just that it's actually probably one of my favorites of the season. This is why I thought that from here on, the final season started to get really, really, really good. There was some good episodes in the first half, but this one for me was just, it was one of the first times in the final season where I was just laughing out loud through the whole episode and having a great time. Jim, any final thoughts on this episode for you before we move on to the next one?
I agree. This was one of the better episodes, but I do think I do think, and we didn't even touch on the whole Boimler thing with him getting the bolt in the ass.
Yeah. There's always a lot of subtle stuff that it's impossible to cover off. But yes, I forgot about the bolt in the
True, but
ass.
that's not even what I was gonna get to. Like, I thought some of the effects or animations, despite their best efforts, like just didn't work. Like when, like during all of Ollie's attempts to make a lightning bolt, when it didn't work out and it just floppy on the ground. I
Mhm.
thought those kind of looked like the energy icons in mobile video games more than they did like an actual threatening lightning bolt.
Yeah, which might have been part of the joke, maybe. Maybe.
But overall, it was a very good episode.
Jonathan, what about you?
I will reiterate what I said pretty much earlier, is that I love this episode all around. I thought it was cleverly done. I mean, it is kind of like lead you to um, the conclusion that, you know, they're going to end up together. I mean, you kind of see that coming, and then the moment you see them together, like, I knew there was going to be, you know, a baby. I was curious to see what shape it was going to be. I honestly thought it was going to be like a pyramid, just to like completely screw with us. But I love, you know, the shape that they came up with and used in that situation, and I think they called them squirrel or something like there. Um, I just thought it was very well done, very clever. And again, I looked at this pretty much from the perspective as if they took a TOS episode and threw it into a TNG style and theme of going about it.
Definitely. And Jerry, final thoughts from yourself on this one? Oh, did we lose Jerry? Maybe we've lost Jerry. Oh, good. We will move on to the next episode, episode 7, which is Fully Dilated. Now, I have to read the opening captain's log from this one because it is really funny. So, Captain's log. The Cerritos has been sent to repair yet another dimensional fissure picked up by a Starfleet observation buoy. Apparently, a purple alternative universe version of the Enterprise crossed into our reality while battling some evil clones of Tasha Yar, or something. I can't keep track. Hilarious. So this is the episode where we have Mariner, Tendi, and Arn. Sorry, I always forget the name of the Vulcan character. Talin. This is their inner light episode, pretty much, where they wind up on a planet where time is being experienced differently, and they have a very deep and meaningful experience, which Mariner is quite intent on having. She's quite determined to have her inner light experience. Jim, how did you find this episode?
This was not one of my favorite episodes.
Okay.
And I think they even they even literally did mention inner light in the episode, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it's a bit of a sci-fi trope to have a character experience almost a lifetime worth of memories. It's been done in TNG,
Yeah,
it's been done in
to death,
Voyager, it's
pretty
been
much.
done in Stargate, it's been done in all of them. So it was
Yeah.
a bit
No,
of
but
tongue in cheek.
like I literally, like I enjoyed, like I thought this was like, I can't even figure out how to say this properly. This wasn't a great episode. Like some of the jokes weren't that. Some of the attempts at jokes just weren't that great. Like I could have done with. I could have done without the fully function. I really could have done without the fully functional data joke. Like,
Of
that was
course, I
just,
forgot Data was in this.
like I thought Brent Spiner was the highlight of the episode. He did a fantastic job. It was
Yeah.
it harkened back to the great TNG era of Data, but Data, you truly are fully functional. Ugh, like it made me want to vomit.
Jonathan, what about you?
Interesting. I had the complete opposite reaction. So again, I thought this was again like a love letter to the fans. So the fact that we get, you know, this purple data head, so that's all that's really different is that you know, he's purple because he comes from the purple universe, the purple Enterprise. I thought some of the jokes that went along with that were hilarious. So it's like, well, what color is your Enterprise? It's like it's neutral. It's like, well, that seems odd when purple is an obvious choice because he comes from the purple universe. Data being in this episode adds the Vulcan kind of play off while Talin's doing its own thing. So being on this, planet that they're going to be stuck there for a while, one that, Mariner at one point realized like, oh, this could be her inner light moment. I want to live the most fulfilling life out of it. And then going out of her way to basically not be herself and then constantly keep ending up in jail and not really like getting what she wants.
I thought she was trying too hard there personally.
Well, she definitely was trying too hard, but that's like, I think, again, one of like the lessons of Star Trek overall is like, be yourself, be true to yourself. When you're not trying to be true to yourself, then you're going to actually end up not getting what you want. When you're trying to, pretend to be something else to get what you want, things are never going to work out the way you want. So you might as well be yourself. So I love that, the fact that it's like, because it never gets kind of thrown into that aspect, like, oh, well, they're going to be stuck on this planet for who knows how long. It's like, well, what if one of them just keeps ending up in jail? Like, I thought that was hilarious. Like, and for the simplest things, and one of the ways being like, oh, I got to go on. Oh, well, there you go, the flame, and we'll put it out. It's like, that was our eternal flame. So like, just others, like, I feel like multiple layers of jokes in that. It's like, well, how eternal really was it if I just put it out with a little bit of water? And I love the way that was done. The fact that Talin starts growing these oversized fruits and vegetables and then brilliantly comes up with beauty products. It's like, oh, I see you guys. I found a loophole in the Prime Directive. I can be famous and make money and actually not really harm the society and help them out at the same time. And Tendi constantly getting cut up in her own thing in a competition that she's not even aware with Talin. So I think it's great because you get to see the three of them from their each own different type of perspective. I do like also like the fact that the food with those gigantic, ridiculous cocktails that they're having in the transporter bay. It's like, yeah, there's a reason why you never see food in there. Like the moment you see that, I was like, this is going to be a problem. Like we're obviously
that was funny.
I have a problem with this. There's a reason there's no food ever in any of these areas.
Yeah.
And then, like they laying out, again, this was like based off of the Voyager episode where the doctor's going to go down and he's supposed to be there for, 2 seconds. Instead, he spends 3 days, or it's supposed to be 3 days local time, but he ends up spending, years down there because of a issue in getting him transported back up. But them throwing it on this and then, kind of taking the Inner Light episode and combining it together to the point where even, Mariner's playing her soap flute at the end. She's like, oh, all I have to reminisce over my family is my little soap flute that she clearly doesn't even know how to play. I loved all of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I was probably a little bit more of a fan this episode than you were, Jim. But you mentioned what was going on with the ridiculous cocktail. I kept cracking up because days and weeks were going past, and then it would just cut back to Boimler and Rutherford still screaming and freaking out, trying to clean all of these like prawns and stuff off of the panel.
With their you mean trying to lick the console?
Yeah.
And I admit their minor storyline was amusing.
Yeah, and you also had the character of Snell, the suspicious character who knows that there's something off about them, which led to Mariner saying, "Why is there always a suspicious lurker when you're in a Carbon Creek situation?" Which was pretty funny. Jerry,
I don't remember there being a lurker in Carbon Creek though.
There's always a lurker. Jerry, how did you find this episode?
This was actually probably one of my favorite episodes of the season. I mean, it's been done time and again where obviously you have the whole crew go down in like disguise to a pre-warp civilization, but I think it was done really, really well. And I think the whole spin on, spending, like 1 second on the ship is like a week down on the planet and stuff. But I think it was done super well. It was, and like to the point of, I think Jonathan made earlier, of the whole like skewers and like shrimp cocktail thing that like Boimler and Rutherford had in the transporter room. I think Talin had my favorite quote of the whole season, where she said something like, I don't understand why you have such ostentatious like food in the transporter bay or something like that. I thought it was really hilarious. I think the only nitpick I really had about it was that like it showed how long Talin, Mariner, and Tendi were down on the planet for. I would have loved to have seen how many seconds it was in the transporter room that it took Boimler and Rutherford to clean the console and lick everything off, essentially, so that we could had a comparison of how short a time it was on the Cerritos and how long it was for them on the planet.
Yeah, which
There could have been a single line that, like, when they're like, "Oh my God, it's been X number of weeks or months for us."
Exactly.
Like, well, I mean, to be fair, it was only 90 seconds on our side.
Yeah.
If I had more time, I would have timed it to see like how long it actually took them to lick the stuff off, and then how long they actually spent on the planet.
Yeah, and we were kind of, I don't know if we were robbed of a B plot. Maybe the A and B plot was kind of what was happening down on the planet anyway. The A and B plot was really all wrapped up in the same setting, which was what was going on with Tallinn and this whole competitiveness that she didn't even realize was going on, and then you've got what Mariner's doing. There's some great jokes in this. I mentioned the Carbon Creek joke before as well. There's even, I'm just reading from Memory Alpha here, and there's a quote after Mariner is finally released from prison after 2 months, and she starts complaining that it's some Edo level bullshit. Like everything.
Yeah. Yeah, 2 months. 2 months for an eye bump. This is some Edo level bullshit. Yeah, the episode's constantly throwing back to these various type of references, call them Easter eggs or references or whatever you want. I think it's really done in love of the fans, appreciation of the show. Right? If you're someone who's never watched all of the series at least once or twice through, hearing Carbon Creek or Edo level, it might go over your head and you not necessarily pick up on it. But for the folks who have loved these shows and have watched them time and time again, we pick up on all these little nuances, and it just makes it that much more enjoyable for us.
Yeah.
The funny thing is that when Mariner mentioned Carbon Creek, I was like, oh, that was like one of the really good T'Pol episodes, and I was thinking to myself, not to jump ahead, like, oh, I wonder if we'll get a T'Pol cameo at some point in this season. That would be really, really cool. And obviously later on we do. So that's.
And that'll be. I mean, yeah, I've got a lot to say about that when it happens, but we'll wait until we get there. We'll wait until we get there. It was nice to have Brent Spiner, even though we get a lot of Brent Spiner in Modern Trek. It was nice to have him back as old school Data, which was really cute. The Pole Purple Enterprise D thing was wacky, but also just kind of funny, just to have as a little subplot and joke there. Yeah, I think this is one of those Lower Decks episodes, like the previous one, that just. Everything story-wise is just working really well. It's absurdity upon absurdity in a way that also kind of makes a weird sort of sense, and the jokes come thick and fast, but they are very, very funny, and it's like a lot of Lower Decks. It's an episode that benefits from multiple watches to just absorb just how much the writers and the animators pour into this show. In every single episode, just how much love and care has gone into making a very funny, self-referential meta kind of experience.
And really quick, so in the beginning, right before they end up going down to the planet, the doctors gotta transform them using medical technology, and we get again that classic line from TOS, but with the modification that only Lower Decks could do. I'm not a doctor, not whatever the fuck this is. Turning them into the creatures with the horns.
Yeah, so funny. Any other final thoughts on this episode before we move on?
Yeah, I did have. This is just kind of just a silly thought. Like they established Snell was an unemployed lurker who absolutely no one gave any credibility to. So. What the heck was he doing when they ran into him that caused him to shift his focus to them?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, some Snell backstory would have been nice, right, Jim?
Yeah. He was constantly a lurker, and so when they're about to leave, Mariner, I think it was, makes the comment of, so it's okay to make sure we protect the Prime Directive as long as we make it out to look like this guy's a loser, and Data replies well, this guy already had all the characteristics of being made out to be a loser.
Yeah.
So we're not, really affecting anything here.
So let's move on to the next episode, which was Upper Decks, which I found to be an interesting kind of weird take on the TNG episode, which inspired Lower Decks, aptly named Lower Decks, a final season episode where they had to try to do something a little bit different and show what else goes on the ship. So we've got an episode here, and this is one where no one's updated the memory alpha page, so we're going to have to rely on our memories here, gentlemen. But this is an episode which shifts the focus very early on to the senior members of the crew and all of the dramas that they have going on in their lives. And the thing is, so like, it's absurd. There's a lot of absurd interpersonal stuff going on, like there often is with the Lower Decks characters, but it's like infinitely more epic. Everything from Shax's weird alter ego and almost like it's like a PTSD experience or something like that about from the Cardassian War. But this is an interesting one. This is one of the... I don't know if I enjoyed this one as much as the previous two episodes. I feel that it was funny. It was a fun episode, but there's something about it. I can't quite put my finger on it where I feel like as an idea, it could have been executed a little bit better. I'll start with Jerry this time. Jerry, what were your thoughts of Upper Decks?
It was definitely a filler episode. Like, it sort of didn't really fit into the whole serialized story of the season. It was sort of put in there as not an afterthought, but like something that they definitely wanted to do because they wanted to highlight the other sort of senior members of the crew, just like they did in TNG Lower Decks.
Mm-hmm.
I think overall it was okay. Definitely not my favorite of the season. I think this is something I've always said before, but like we love to see like lots of different nationalities portrayed in Star Trek, and I've always thought there's not enough representation of Aussies in Star Trek, David. And we finally got a really good character in Meredith to be like the Aussie Starfleet officer in Star Trek. So I feel like vindicated that we needed more Aussies on Star Trek. So
when we were, my friends and I were watching the final episode, we were like, has anyone noticed that there's all of a sudden an Australian engineer in engineering?
That was really cool.
Where did she come from? I need to know who actually voices Meredith as well. I had a feeling if anyone's seen Mythic Quest, I was kind of thinking it might be the same actress who portrays Poppy in that show, but I need to find that out. But anyway, yes, justice for Meredith. We needed more Meredith. Jonathan, what about you? What are your thoughts on Upper Decks?
So I think these three final episodes all require at least a minimum of 2 watches, really. Because there's a lot going on at once. I also think generally rated, this is going to be one of the lower rated episodes for this season, but I think that's going to change in time.
Yeah.
I thought this was a perfect final season episode in that it's an homage to what made the show possible, right? So this is a flipping on what the show is about. It's a flipping of Lower Decks, literally being Upper Decks from the TNG episode, where that one was titled Lower Decks. And I think at the time, many people didn't enjoy that episode because people said, I don't know who these people are. We rarely ever hear them, or they're introducing these new folks. Like, who cares about them? And it's sad. One of them died and makes the bridge officers kind of look callous. And I think the immediate reaction to this is going to be almost the opposite. Like, these are not the main characters. They're not as funny. They're not as interesting. I don't like them as much. But like, that's sort of the whole point of this episode, is to pay homage and flow it back. So, they're constantly talking about how the Lower Decks are the ones that really run the ship and that their jobs are the hardest and that the commanders have the easiest job because they just sit back in the chair, and it's thrown back again to that position to be like, oh no, there's a reason why, these folks are commanders and they are dealing with a lot more responsibility and problems. You just don't have to necessarily get to see that, which, why everyone loves watching all the other Star Treks, which is about the bridge crew.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Jim, what about you?
Okay, first off, I did look it up. That is the same person who played Poppy in Myth Quest.
Charlotte, yeah, I've been looking it up too. It's Charlotte Nakato who did, yes. So,
Yeah.
one, I'm very excited that she was in Lower Decks. Two, we needed more because, as Jerry was saying, Australia is incredibly underrepresented in the 24th century. I feel like, for the most part, the only references we've ever had is in Space Seed. Where they're like, oh yes, the Australian penal colony of Botany Bay. it's where the airport is now. But or we get references to New Zealand being being a penal colony as well. Like it's just
do Aussie actors being incorporated into the Star Trek family count at all?
Well, I guess yeah. So Chapel is so the actress who plays Chapel.
Evan?
Who's that? Sorry.
Evan Evagora?
Ah, yeah, true. Yeah. They're all masking their accents, though.
No,
I'm sure there's not, Romulans with Australian accents.
Well, hey, I mean, I guess we did have the koala. So we did have the
Oh, and speaking of which, is that a koala on your wonderful Christmas
It is.
sweater?
It is. Yes.
I'm like, that officially makes it a Star Trek Christmas sweater as well.
100%.
Yeah, the great koala would approve, Davey. And I have to say, I wasn't a huge fan of this episode. Like, so much so I don't even really remember a whole lot from this episode.
Yeah, it's one that, and that's, I think, to Jonathan's point, it's one of those ones that probably benefits from a couple of watches, because I'm sitting here as well, desperately trying to jog my memory, and the main thing I can remember is the Shaxx plot line with, he's almost like, was it a guilt over what he did during the Cardassian War? Like, what was that?
Something like that, yeah. I'm not sure. The only other thing I remember is like, it is like the space cows or something like that. At least I think it was like a space cow or something.
Yeah, that was the whole like ransom plot line of getting Lower Decks to work with each other by like him being like a doofus and getting them together basically. That was a bit of a weird like B plot storyline or A/B plot storyline of the whole episode.
Yeah.
But I think that also explains Ransom a little bit over time, right? So Ransom's always made out to be like he's like a gym head, right? He's just some guy. Somehow he's ranked up. He's like loyal to his captain. He follows Starfleet rules, but he's kind of like this idiot who's only obsessed with working out, and that's played through constantly. So to see from his perspective here, he's like, "Oh, I'm playing stupid. I'm playing. What you don't realize is I'm playing stupid the entire time, and I'm using that as a way to get you guys to bond together and work when you were going at it. So like I'm your common enemy, and I think that's like another thing of leadership, right? Willing to be that like person, like, all right, yeah, you know what I really need to get done is for us to get this job done, and that means getting these two people who hate each other to cooperate. So what I'm going to do is get them to hate me instead, and then that way they'll work together. And then because they work together and now they have a mutual bond in hating me, they'll be able to keep working together going forward. What do I care if they hate me? I'm their boss. They got to do what I say anyways.
Yeah.
So I think that like adds a layer of depth to his character that we hadn't seen previously.
That makes sense. He's playing the long game, basically, Jonathan. So.
There was
At least it means Delta don't hate each other anymore.
True.
It's true.
There was something else in this episode which I just remembered, which was something I'd always thought about, and it was the maintaining of the relationship between Carol Freeman and Admiral Freeman, because he shows up in this and they go on a date and all that kind of stuff. So there was a little. I was glad that they kind of explored that, because I was like, are they actually still married? Are they still together? And I think this kind of answered that question.
And we see Stevens again. I forgot about that.
Yeah. Like it's one of those things that just. I mean, it came up right in the beginning of the series, but Admiral Freeman's barely in it apart from that. Like, it's like, well, what's going on here? How do you maintain a marriage in this kind of situation?
Well, clearly somehow, but I am remembering this now. Like, I remember we see Stevens in this episode, and I'm remembering like, his entire plot line throughout the entire series up to this point was he's the lapdog of Ransom, and now suddenly he's the captain's aide.
Yeah, yeah. Any final thoughts on this one? Because I'm dying to get to the next episode. So, any final thoughts on Upper Decks? No.
I'll again just say that I think this was almost a necessary episode to have before closing out the entire series, to just kind of harken back to what allowed it to be created.
I agree. And like I said, with the whole with the Freemans, there's almost like some semi closure for some of the senior bridge crew and some of the storylines that they had going on, and different things about their personality as well, which was kind of cool. All right, so let's move on to the penultimate episode, which just had the fandom in a meltdown.
Oh, that's being nice too.
But like in a good way. Like, yeah. So the internet broke amongst Star Trek fans when Fisher Quest came out, because I was thinking about, before we went live, a way to describe this episode, and it's like the most bonkers piece of fan fiction brought to life in the most wonderful of ways. And it gave us all this stuff that we thought we would never see, from the return of just Jolene, not Jolene Blaylock, just Jolene.
Has anyone had that Dolly Parton song stuck in their head ever?
Yes. Because I was waiting for the credits. I'm like, is it her? Is it actually her? She said she'd never do anything again. Like, she married some millionaire and hasn't had to bother with conventions to make money. So she's just all of a sudden... And then when it showed up, it's just Jolene as T'Pol. I was like, amazing. And then I'm also like, wow. So the artist formerly known as...
of rewatches to like finally recognize that is definitely her.
Yeah. So we had a lot going on
about like why she would come back like now to do it, which I guess makes sense because it's all animated and stuff. Like, but
pretty low effort.
So I feel like if you were going to design a penultimate episode for Lower Decks, you're going to say, let's give the fans as much as we can in this one episode without throwing off our entire storyline.
Yeah.
And I feel like they figured out a very brilliant way of doing so that connects to the final episode and sets up, possibilities for other shows or other things to be introduced or taken from other shows in the future.
Yeah.
So we'll get to the individual parts of it, but I mean, I almost feel like this was written from the Star Trek meme pages and meme posts, all the various things. And again, and that's what I mean by being a pure love letter to the fans. So going to the fact that we even get to see, T'Pol come back, right? Why? Because what do the fans really want? And they know they can't have. They want Jolene back, and she says she's done with Star Trek. It's not going to happen. So, man, if we could get Jolene, how many lines, how long will it take her to be able to record? Like, the fans will go wild. And yes, there's a reason why we get to go wild. Plus, they get to throw in with a single sentence what we all wanted to know was her and, Trip having been married. If there was allowed to make the final episode twice as long, I feel like we maybe would have seen little snapshots of that and, had a sentence or two from Connor playing, Trip as his character. But, there's only so much they can do and they have a limited budget. So I get why we didn't get that. But that being one of the first things set up, I immediately went like, oh, this is about to be the final love letter of the writers saying, we're going to give you everything we possibly can in one episode. And then also justice in a way, right? For however they could. So people do feel ripped off for the way that Trip died. So let's give you this alternate timeline kind of story. Harry Kim, if I can talk for a moment about Harry Kim, my God, Garrett Wong will not shut the hell up about Harry Kim not getting promoted. The internet thinks it's hilarious and use him as multiple examples. I read something today that had said, do you realize that when Voyager docked at DS9, one of the people who could have served him, not necessarily would have been Nog, who by the time Voyager came back, Nog, who was just a Ferengi, not in the part of the Starfleet at all, would have outranked Harry Kim by the time Voyager came back. I'm like, you know what? That's hilarious and true. And so the other thing is that Garrett had been told multiple times, like, oh, well, he wanted to be in this Star Trek. There was talk about him being in Prodigy. There was talk about maybe, using him in Picard as a one-off because, we got to see Tuvok and Jerry Ryan in Picard. I think
they got as far as the fittings in Picard with
Garrett. Well, so, it's like, where are we going to get the justice for Harry/Garrett in this? And they do it in the, like, most beautiful way, elegant lower decks way. Is like, all right, let's do this and have fun with it. We're not going to bring back Harry Kim. We're going to have the crew of Harry Kims.
Yeah, and they're
going to have Madman Harry Kim even.
Yeah, and you can tell Garrett Wong was just having the best time doing this. Like we rewatched this episode before the finale because I had some friends over, and we were all in stitches, especially at the end where he's flying the ship towards the fissure. He's like, "I'm Harry fucking Kim."
Yes. Oh yeah, you can tell Garrett was loving it. I mean, there's another one little line where they're in the jail cells and all the Kims are in one cell and everyone else in the others, and the most senior, the 2-Pip Kim, as they refer to him. He's like, are you seeing this? They even got us in a separate cell from everybody else. And like it's starting to turn in his mind, like, this is some fucked up shit. They're all still 1-Pips. So I thought that was hilarious, well done. And I feel like Harry Kim and Garrett got their justice. Because at one point I'm like, wait a minute, they can't have Harry's character go out, even though these are Harrys from different, universes. They can't have him being overpowered by one that's saying screw everyone else, and like, no, they let the one go off and die, and the others get transported back to the ship, being their loyal Starfleet selves that they are.
Yeah. And we can't talk about this episode without talking about this. Now give me a second to see if I can share this. Now this is the moment that truly broke the internet and the fandom, and it was so like nonchalantly kind of introduced as like, oh, Garrick, our chief medical officer, and his husband, an EMH of Dr. Julian Bashir.
Tinker Tailor Tenor Spy. He's now Tinker Tailor Surgeon Spy.
Yeah. So how did we feel, I'll start with you, Jerry, about finally, all of us have been vindicated. What we've known all along is that Garrick was hot for Julian and was a queer character. How did you feel having this finally? I guess it's been canonized because we all accept that Lower Decks is canon.
Yeah, no, I think it was a really good moment for the fan base overall. Obviously, like, they're from different realities and stuff, but I think it's a good, almost sort of compromise that it's obviously not Prime Garrick and Prime Universe shit, but it gives, I guess, some insight to, I guess, the overall sort of personalities of the character, because I think, like, later on, the like Boimler and Mariner say something along the lines of like friendship transcends all the different realities and stuff. So, I think that despite these guys being from not the Prime universe, still has some echoes into the Prime universe, with what their relationship is like and how they bonded and stuff. So I think this is really awesome.
And I love the cute little argument over which reality they're going to live in. Oh, you just assumed we're going to live in your reality. Jonathan, how was this for you, finally seeing this on screen?
Well, so I'm going to add on to what Jerry said here and expand upon it. That, like, I think it's actually more important that they mention that this Garrick and this Bashir are from different universes as well, right? Because if they're from the same universe and they ended up there, that's one version. Say, okay, well, at least in one universe, there are a couple. As he said, there's the reference of, being told how Mariner and Boimler's relationship and friendship transcends space and time. And so I think that's kind of what they're hinting at and playing up here as well, is that, yeah, this is a one-off unique situation, so we can kind of do whatever we want. And yes, fans, we're giving you exactly what you want, so now it's officially canon. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, we're making the statement that, like, this transcends more than this one-off situation, because they're from different universes. The fighting over, which universe they're going to live in, I think is great, because it says that they're married, but this has been going on for however long, and yet they still haven't had that conversation about which universe they're going to live in when this goes ahead and gets settled. It did briefly make me think, like, did Garrick program him and create him? But when they say he's from another universe, that like clears that up. It's like, no, he is his own sentient, EMH self, and we get to see that version of him somehow enter in here, and him and Garrick fall in love. So, and they're still having, the typical types of relationship fights that you would expect.
You're right. The writers of this show are sometimes more clever than I think they get credit for. Most of the time, in that very sense of, like, yes, of course. I mean, you can read into this a few different things. You can take it as like, oh, why couldn't it just be our universe's Garrick and Bashir? But you're exactly right. This goes to show that, well, if they were really in love with each other, then that love crosses realities, because two from different realities can come together and still want to get married. So it's super cute. Jim, how did you find the final coming together of Garrick and Bashir?
I admit I never picked up on that in the series, but I'm definitely a fan of this pairing right here. And I have to admit, they were part of like one of my favorite scenes in the episode. It was the scene where it's like, I think it's Curzon is giving 2-Pip Harry the tour. You see these two like walking along, mentioning how Garrick's a tailor in some realities, and they're mentioning that, and then Harry and Curzon mention to each other about that, and Curzon says something like, "Lovers don't fall out of the quantum reality for Curzon."
Curzon was weird. Curzon was the most bonkers addition to the whole thing, I think.
Yes. Played beautifully, I might add, by Fred Tatasciore. He did it brilliantly.
Yeah.
That was the only one that I felt they had a missed opportunity with. Right? So why Curzon Dax?
I would have liked Ezri.
Maybe to play off of the others. Maybe to not play favoritism for Jadzia or Esri.
Maybe, yeah.
That seems like maybe a dangerous.
Right, he was also one of the only ones we didn't really have a backstory on all that much.
It was interesting that the ending, though, was T'Pol essentially became Dax at the end.
That kind of came off as was that good for you too, T'Pol, kind of a thing.
I was sort of semi-hoping that like they would transfer the host over to T'Pol, and T'Pol would be like become like a Vulcan Trill kind of hybrid at the end.
Yeah, yes, to say you can kind of take it. I mean, she almost does, but doesn't. So, but I believe it was with the intention of transferring that consciousness back to someone once she returns to his quantum reality, I guess.
If she ever returns to his reality.
Yeah. The other guest star we haven't really touched on to this was Alfre Woodard from First Contact.
Yes.
That blew me away. No, that was so
surprised.
And that was really the crux of all the fissures and the dimensional rifts, was that it was another reality where instead of inventing a warp drive, Zephram Cochrane invented a cross-reality travel mechanism of sorts.
Quantum drive or something.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think it was really nice
Yeah.
that, like, you know, they made it out, like, I think at the beginning of the season, like it was a whole sort of big bad for the whole season, right? As like the arc of the whole sort of serialized concept
Mm.
from the beginning of season 5. But I thought it was a really nice twist that actually they're not bad guys. It's not someone trying to destroy the fabric of reality and like all the different quantum universes. It's actually just, you know, another federation that's out there doing a different kind of exploring, which I thought was a really nice twist to it.
Which is a very Star Trek thing. It kind of
Yeah.
reminds me of the ending of season 4 of Discovery, where they thought that all of the gravimetric distortions or whatever they were was some kind of menace or attack on our galaxy, and it turned out it was just another species that was just trying to gather up some natural resources, and it was all about a communication difference and all that kind of stuff. Like, it's a very Star Trek thing to have the misunderstood intentions.
Very guilty of doing the other version of it too. They very much are, but they also they also do it this way too, very well sometimes as well.
Yeah, yeah. So the ending of this episode had me in stitches. That the to be continued, where
Oh my god!
I piggybacked a message to my duplicate. He'll know what to do. Yeah, as long as he doesn't freak out, and then it's back
You're all
to.
gonna die!
I know, and the screaming and the crashing whilst to be continued is up on the screen. I was crying, laughing so much at that.
Oh my god! Every time I watched it, no matter how many times I knew it was coming, I still die laughing watching it.
All right.
So I just want to go quickly back to including Lily Alfre Woodard. Am I saying that correctly?
I believe so. Yeah.
Again, I think that is done it as another love letter to the fans. So, on the last Star Trek cruise, I was having a conversation with some folks, and we kind of said, who do you think did one of like the best guest stars to, a single one-off kind of episode or movie experience? And her name came up several times. And she's one of the few people we haven't had brought back, right? There are many fan favorites that people have loved, but they've either been brought back already in Lower Decks, or we've seen them in Picard or included in Discovery in some sort of mention or one-off. And so I think, again, it was trying to wrap up as much as we can. How many of these different guest stars and cameos can we get in? Because that's another thing that made Lower Decks so special, that you don't really have that in other series. Strange New World has done it now, obviously, and Discovery created Strange New World, so there's a way, I guess, to look at it as that. But I love the way that was done, and again, as you said here, it's a different way of exploring. When she's describing it as, I don't need to see new species, I need to see different versions of what humanity can be, and then describe what those different types of, like, there's one universe I've been to where they have rings around the moon, another one where they've done this, and another where they've done this. And I thought that was, again, just like very classic Star Trek, is that we're trying to explore to learn, but we also really want to understand ourselves, and we do that best through other versions of ourselves. And essentially that's what Star Trek is, right? We're trying to understand the human condition. We're doing that easier by understanding it in a future presence with putting it in through the eyes of aliens.
Yeah, it was super cool, and I do agree. I think Lily, Alfre Woodard as Lily, is one of the best one-off characters we've ever had. It was so nice to have her back again. She is one of the driving forces behind First Contact. She's got some amazing lines in it, and she's a fantastic actor in her own right, which we were really blessed to have in Star Trek on more than one occasion now, which is really cool. All right, let's move on to the finale with a title that I actually really, really love in terms of what this means for Lower Decks and the franchise, and the fact that it's maybe not really an ending, but a new beginning, which was the new Next Generation. And there's a lot happening in this episode. There's a lot happening. So there's this is essentially Boimler's received the message, and it's up to the crew of the Cerritos in, you know, the Prime timeline or the Prime universe. Although if you go back to the first episode of this season, there was some disagreement over which was the Prime universe. Everyone's like, well, our universe is the Prime universe. Why is yours the Prime universe? Let's do a quick round of the room. As far as finales go, how does this one stack up? Jerry, I'll start with you.
I wish you had started with me, Davey. Yeah, I think it was. I think it tied up everything pretty well, and it also sort of set up for any sort of potential networks that want to take on Lower Decks, either later on or in a nearer future. And it gave everybody sort of at least a closing arc to their own storylines throughout the last 5 seasons of Lower Decks. So I think, you know, I think it was some of it was a little rushed, like as all finales are, but I'm glad it wasn't I'm glad it wasn't These Are the Voyages. And also, I'm also glad it didn't have a lot of like legacy character cameos in it, and it was its own sort of self-contained finale to Lower Decks, and it really focused on, you know, the Lower Decks crew, the Upper Decks crew, and, you know, and gave us some sort of potential leeway into some spin-offs in the future.
Yeah, I mean, we had the two Klingon brothers come back, which were probably the only real kind of guest star characters. But in general, we sort of saw everyone who was a Cerritos crew member, right down to the character that Haley Joel Osment voiced, who was the one who, with the first time we saw the koala, the guy who ascended, he pops up very randomly. You've got the dolphins in it as well, who are just as horny as ever. Like, that Klingon's really hot. Like, so it's all like it was. And even though the Enterprise shows up, you don't actually see the. I was like, oh, okay, we're gonna get all the Enterprise crew.
I really wanted a Michael Dorn like 2-minute cameo thing.
Yeah,
that's the only thing I wouldn't want to see.
He's been in more Star Trek episodes than anyone else, so he doesn't need another.
He doesn't need another credit. But it would have been nice after they.
He's doing just fine.
Jonathan, what did you?
Nice to see Warp in command though, after like they said in Picard, like what did Warp do to the Enterprise E, right?
Yeah, it's like that was not my fault.
I think this was honestly one of the more satisfying endings we've ever gotten for a Star Trek show. So. Obviously, Enterprise was a mess because it was rushed, and Discovery was a little add-on to a thing, so it was an incomplete story. This was a satisfying end. There are some great, like, iconic scenes. You know, the still that I think almost everyone who posted something about this is what they used for their final post is when they're in the turbo lift going up, and Mariner's giving, you know, her last speech. You know, like that, and her speech is really well done. Going to show that, like, yeah, this is a crazy messed up thing that, like, your alternate version, your transporter clone did to yourself, but he did so because he knows he can trust the people of this ship, the crew of the Cerritos. You know, Cerrito strong. There's a lot of hearkening back to even the first episode, but the original series as well. Even, you know, in the last seconds of the episode, of, you know, engage the core, and it's like, oh, please don't do that. What if this turns out to be a 5-year mission? That's like, well, that's kind of got like a couple meanings and jokes in itself. Like, TOS was supposed to be a 5-year mission. They just completed, you know, their 5 seasons of the show. So I read that to have multiple meanings in the way that it was doing that as well. And I love that we even got, you know, one additional last warp phrase. So engage the core. If it hasn't caught on yet, it will. It's going to be used as much as warp me and hit it, let's fly, engage. I love that we got, you know, one more of those. And I don't know how much time they spend thinking up of these particular, you know, warp lines, but I think that hit the nail on the head. Like, when I heard that, I laughed uncontrollably. And I'm like, that is so perfect. Engage the core. It's so perfect.
I'm going to think that every time I go to the gym now, every time my PT says engage the core, I'm just going to think of Ransom.
Yeah, it's such a rant, and that's just the thing. It was so good for Ransom. And you know, God bless Jerry O'Connell. He really did that character so well, because I feel like Ransom is the exact opposite of Jerry O'Connell. Jerry O'Connell's this tall, lanky guy. Ransom's the big buffed, like.
Which really makes me really wish when they had done the live action we had seen Ransom.
I know. Jim, where does this rank for you? Because we're getting some interesting in the chat. We've got Peter from the Trek Book Club. Now, he says that this is his 4th favorite Trek finale after DS9, TNG, and Picard. Where does it rank for you?
I'd say it ranks middle of the pack for me. It's not the greatest finale, but it does wrap things up pretty well.
It's interesting. I found myself feeling very moved in the end of it, because it's like you were saying, Jonathan, it's not this tacked on epilogue like we got with Discovery, which we're very lucky we got. I had to remind my friends when we were watching it, because they were complaining about the Discovery finale. I'm like, we are so lucky they got to come back and film that at all to give any kind of closure, because most of the time a show gets cancelled, which, I mean, Lower Decks was essentially cancelled as well, right? So I don't know if they knew that they were going to end whilst they were writing this, but
No, I don't think they did either.
Yeah. So it kind of came about quite suddenly.
Yeah, but for me, Davey, the other thing is, like, when you got a 2-part series finale and the first part is leagues better than the second part, in my opinion, like, that takes it down a couple of notches for me.
Yeah, it's a hard one. I don't know if I'd say it's leagues better. Like, I enjoyed both episodes. I think Fisher Quest, it's gonna go down as just a fan favorite, regardless, right?
Yeah.
Like
Fisher Quest, I laughed uncontrollably throughout the entire episode, but the last episode, like, there were parts I laughed in very much so, but I didn't laugh almost the entire episode, unlike in Fisher Quest.
Yeah. I mean, I loved that it was a very Lower Decks episode, this finale, like right down to when Freeman's being ordered to close the fissure and undertake the dangerous mission. She's like, shouldn't like the Enterprise be doing this? And then I love how they're flying through and all the realities keep changing, and she's "Where goes Sovereign class?"
or like when they find themselves on the Terran Empire ship and Shax can't use the weapons.
Yes. There's one moment which was slipped in there very tongue in cheek, which has also got some of the new Trek haters really kind of wagging their tongues. Was that when the realities are warping on the Klingon ship, one of the Klingons turns into a Discovery Season 1 Klingon, and a Discovery Klingon bird of prey comes flying out.
I liked that. I actually liked that moment.
I thought it was hilarious, because it's one of the very few times that Lower Decks has made a reference to Discovery at all. It's obviously referenced Strange New Worlds, but the only other time I can think of where they have referenced Discovery, there's one point, I can't remember what season was, but Boimler starts talking about like the difference between ongoing serialized adventures that just get more and more epic that you can't miss an episode of, otherwise you don't know what's going on, kind of thing. He mentioned something like that. Otherwise, you never really get any references or jokes about Disco. And interestingly, it sent people into a bit of a tailspin, because they're going, "Oh, this is Lower Decks essentially saying that Discovery is not prime timeline." And Mike McMahon's just
I didn't get that at all.
Yeah, Mike McMahon's just going, "Look, we did it tongue in cheek, right? Read into it what you will," but it was very much just a joke.
I very much enjoyed seeing like all the ships, seeing all the different types of ships, like when that one bird of prey transformed into the Klingon sailing vessel.
Yes, the Barge of the Dead. Yeah.
And you see the bodies floating away. Oh, that was great. And of course, who could forget Ta'ana's line when they're wondering, like, why aren't all their ships transforming so much? And she's like, they probably are. They just like all the same. They just like their ships to have all the same design.
Yeah. Dear.
So what I loved with that sequence of the changing the different ships. So when they're coming up now, I can only imagine the pressure in writing a series finale for a Star Trek show. It's got to be epic to some new level, and each of them try to take it on a different way. We've seen it where you've got a million ships on each side ready to fight this epic war. You've seen it as a one-off ship. You've seen it as Voyager getting home. And what I love with this is that you kind of want to see all the different types of ships, right? As a fan, I do want to see as many different types of ships as possible, but the storyline doesn't really call for it. And so in this way of doing it as, well, the ship keeps changing, and so you get to see every type of class of ship the Cerritos turn into. I love that, really well done. And then like when it turns into Sovereign class, Captain Freeman says, well, I guess I'll settle for this, as if not like that's the ship that you want, the only ship you want to be using at that particular moment. And then, turning into a Terran ship, and it's like Shax's being super excited, like, oh, all the weapons we have, and it's like, oh, they're all offline. So again, doing this thing where they keep playing up for the lower decks characters' individual characteristics, but giving the fans in a different way everything that they want. And that one line of, well, the Klingon birds of prey not changing. Well, again, think goes back to like Discovery when they decide on what class of ships they're going to be using, and they kind of keep those going forward. So I loved everything they did with it. Again, my only issue would be is, I want more, which is always going to be one of my complaints. So, if they could, when they're doing these final episodes, make them twice as long, or obviously, give us more seasons, more episodes. That's always what I want. But I feel like they tried to do as much as they could in this final season. And the show was essentially canceled without anybody knowing. But it also, the way that it was done, and I said this about Discovery as well, is did the writers maybe see something on the wall ahead of time that everyone else didn't, and then said, you know what, let's pretend this is our last and prepare for it accordingly. Because if it wasn't their final season, I don't know that we would have gotten the episode Upper Decks, which I know is not necessarily a fan favorite now, but I think is going to be loved, 5 years from now. The whole Fissure episode, if they didn't know that this was going to be the end of the show, the whole series was a level of, oh, this was them saying, okay, to the haters out there, and that say, well, this is not canon, and then the fans are making this stuff up and blah, blah, blah. Guess what? F you, we're giving the fans, the loyal fans, exactly what they want. If you're the one who's been spending the time coming up with fan fiction, we love you, and what you're talking about is canon now. So I feel like they gave us everything they could give us with this final season. Yeah.
One thing I do want to talk about was the inclusion of the Klingons in this final episode. So like Relga and the two brothers. At first I was like, oh, this seems like an interesting thing to just randomly have as the bad guy for the final episode.
I could have done without that.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of worked in a weird sort of way. But if we didn't get this, we would not got the thing that actually had me cracking up more than anything in the episode, and that was Relga's little chihuahua version of a Targ. That had like the weird, like crazy eyes.
Miserably. She treats the Targ so badly. Like there are several times where it's like she should be brought up on the Klingon version of animal cruelty charges. The way she just tosses that thing aside.
It was so funny though, because it's classic animation to just have this little animal that never says anything but just does all these weird facial animations and stuff that just is so funny. I was like, okay, of course there'd be different. They're a domesticated animal. There'd be different breeds of Targ, and this is the Paris Hilton Chihuahua Targ. It was kind of, but like any Chihuahua, it was bonkers crazy. So, that stood out for me as something that was, again, it was just Lower Decks being Lower Decks. Let's bring it to how it all wrapped up and how it all ended. So. It's Starbase 80 kind of becomes the new Deep Space Nine and is holding guard.
I just have one phrase to say on that, and I'll let it, and I'm done. Justice for Starbase 80.
Yeah. And And Captain Freeman becomes the commander of that, which is why. So she takes on a really important role, which I think is a really good ending for Freeman. You know, she becomes the new Cisco of a sorts in a way that she's manning one of the most important outposts, right? Because Cisco was kind of like Cisco was just an everyday commander who accidentally wound up becoming captain of one of the most important outposts of the quadrant, and now Freeman is doing the same. And then that's how we wind up with our lieutenants Boimler and Mariner, who are in competition for the first officer role for Captain Ransom of the Cerritos. So I'll start with you, Jonathan. How do you feel this was all wrapped up? Because it's an ending, but I think there's always that hope that, you know, if we could do a little more, maybe a movie or something like that, there's some threads to pull on. What do you think?
I think in hindsight, there was a lot of foreshadowing of what was to come in ways that are only starting to click. So when I got the email notice for this, I quickly looked and said, man, do I have time to rewatch the entire series? And I started from the beginning, and I got through seasons 1 through 3 completely. And then because of timing and when this was going to be starting, I realized like I wanted to make sure I rewatched the last final episodes again and kind of had to skip ahead. So I've essentially rewatched everything going back. And there are little things of like, so Boimler grows a beard as we see throughout this season, right? And the justification is because in the other timeline that he's got the pad from, he realizes that works for him. And that's going to be what he thinks is going to make him to be more successful. But in the very first season, we actually hear references to him wanting to be on the bridge and wanting to be like a number one, and the joke being like, well, I guess you better start growing a beard. And so I wonder how many things kind of get thrown in throughout and kind of tied in ways that we don't fully understand and only going to get on multiple rewatches going through. There's a lot of things that happen in this episode that are done without even words at all. As you talked about the animation with the animal, but also talked about earlier, the transcending guy. He doesn't speak a word. If you're not looking at the TV at the moment, you might miss that 1 second clip, but suddenly something opens out of the sky and he pops on down looking very confused and overwhelmed. Yeah. And there he is back again. So there's a lot of little things in that. I like that they do their version of the montage. Essentially, we're going to show you everyone on the ship, but actually showing you everyone on the ship. So including the people who you've seen as one-offs. So the Delta shifters, right? I don't know any of their names, but at least we got to see them again. And any of the other Star Treks in their finales and their montages, they never include all of the extra type of background or lower deckers, if you will. And I feel like they go out of their way to try to show you like anyone that you've seen more than one episode, we're going to give you this one off. And then even the way it ends with Ollie, being the one to come in, like truly showing that she has found her place and being able to use her Thunderbolt energy or whatever to disable the shield at the right time and frequency, kind of like throwing back to, what started all is that, like, I think that character was thrown in there so that way they could end the series with a tie to what started everything, Star Trek, the original series. I just think it was really well done. Again, my only real complaint was like, obviously I always want more. When I watched the episode the first time, I ended with a laugh and a smile on my face. And then I watched the Ready Room episode and, that brought me to tears. And then when I went through and was watching it again here, I could not help be, a mixture of laughter and tears in watching it a second time. Because I do think it was really well done. Is it the best ending? No, maybe not. But again, this is, still fresh for us. So I don't think it's fair to judge it as an overall ending compared to shows that have been off the air for 25, 30, 50 years.
Yeah, and can I say as well, press that you managed to get through 3 seasons since I sent out the notification that we were doing this. That was only a couple of days ago, Jonathan, so you did well.
I was just saying, if you had given me one extra day, I would have. All I need is one. If I had one day earlier, I would have done it. I was going to try to push it, but then I was like, I'm going to get so close that I may not get to do a rewatch of the last 5, so I have to I literally set an alarm that like wherever I'm at this point, I have to rewatch starting from episode 6 on season 5.
And you mentioned as well there the different characters from across the 5 seasons who popped in. Even Ollie, our most recent character, the demigod, she gets a moment in this final episode where she hurls one of her bolts at the Klingon ship and, you know, finally kind of gets, you know, like finds her role and her space aboard the Cerritos, which is really cool. And you know what? There's something I really like about Lower Decks is whilst the lower deckers and their rank and station on the ship was kind of the joke to start with, it hasn't really been about just beating them down. It's actually been a show that has had a lot of heart to it. There's a lot of really amazing themes of togetherness and friendship and everyone finding their place no matter who they are or where they're from or what their strengths and weaknesses are. Lower Decks has actually been probably one of the most inclusive Star Treks ever, with one of the most important hidden messages ever underneath all the humor and absurdity. And I think that's something I'll take away from this. Jim, so your final thoughts on how it all wrapped up.
I can't say anything better than the way you just said it.
Yeah, it's pretty special. And like Jonathan says, they did something very clever, and that was left us wanting more. It may not have been the best finale, but it was probably the best finale you could have given Lower Decks. Jerry, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to follow on sort of Jonathan's sort of analysis of the whole Lower Decks series from start to finish. I didn't quite get the chance to watch Lower Decks all the way from season 1 to season 3 or wherever you got to, Jonathan, but it just, like, Lower Decks, I don't think I appreciated Lower Decks as much as maybe I should have, like, since it came out, but I definitely have developed an appreciation for what it has been trying to do. And you're totally right, Davey, it's been probably the most inclusive Trek because it's animated media which has allowed it to be so, right? So we've been able to include all these different storylines, we've been able to include all these different characters and plots, etc. And I think it tied it up in a really, really neat way where it gave us sort of a launch pad to potentially go into further spin-offs for the franchise, which, like, it's really difficult for some of the live action stuff to do for finales and stuff. And it pretty much had everything, it pretty much had something for everybody, whether you're an old sort of hand in terms of having grown up with Trek from TOS and TNG in the 90s Trek to now and stuff. So, I think it like the writers and the voice actors of the franchise did such a super good job of just being able to have something for everybody in this series.
Beautiful. Well, that's about all the time we have. Well, I was thinking we might try and keep this to an hour. We've gone for over an hour and a half, but hey, there was a lot to talk about. Jim, Jerry, Jonathan, thank you so much for joining in on this wonderful Hive Mind exploration of the final 5 episodes of Lower Decks. Before we depart, just a quick round of where people can find you online. I'll start with you, Jim.
I am in the Discord chat.
You're in the Discord chat. Link in the episode description. Yep. Jerry, what about yourself?
I'm also in a Discord chat where you can find me relatively active. I'm also on some of the Trexperts episodes from time back and hopefully in the future at some point. And I'd like to shamelessly also plug my friend Todd A. Davis's podcast, Computer Resume, at Computer Resume on Instagram, and all of the other handles of taking a trip through the Trek universe in chronological order.
Do love. We're a big fan of Todd here at the BQN. He's guest starred on a number of our shows quite a few times. And Jonathan, what about yourself?
I'm in the Facebook group, and you can find me on Facebook at Jonathan Michael Stout.
Beautiful. Well, remember, if you would like to be a part of a future Hive Mind discussion, you can sign up to be a patron over at patreon.com/BQN. We do lots of other things as well, like early release of episodes, and we also occasionally do a table read, which we haven't done for a while. I think we definitely need to do one of those again once Christmas is done. For me, remember, you can find my 2 shows on the BQN, the Trexperts Quiz, where we just did our Christmas special, a very Beverly Christmas, with Sophia and Adrian and Tegan from Where's Beverly. And my other show, The Bargain Bin Gamer, spelt Gaymer, where I explore cheap and affordable games. You will see our Christmas episode where we review Christmas Massacre and Marvel Rivals coming out, hopefully in the next 24 hours before Christmas actually hits. That's pretty much it for now. We hope you've enjoyed the conversation. We'll see you again soon. Live long and prosper. Sarcastic Vulcans salute everyone.